Part one of the epilogue, going along with the tax exempt foundations, will be the part about money. And Norman Dodd used to work in a bank. And then at some point, he told the bank he was working at, a Morgan bank, he gave them a report that took him 2.5 years to put together. And in the report, he came to a conclusion that we should return to sound banking. And the people at Morgan Bank, his bosses told him that we will never return to sound banking ever again. That was in the early 1930s that Norman Dodd discovered that. And to go along with that, I'm going to show where the creature from Jekyll Island came from. Jekyll Island is in Georgia, state of Georgia, right here in America. And that's where they got together and put together the plan for the Federal Reserve, which sounds like it's a federal branch of government, or branch of government that decides what happens to the money. But they're not really federal. They're owned by a group of people who decide the money interest of America. And when interest goes up and all sorts of things, the Federal Reserve is responsible for. They give America money. America pays the money back in interest. So we're going to look at chapter 1 of The Creature from Jekyll Island and see exactly how this thing came together for the Federal Reserve that started here in America in 1913. Though there have been other reserve banks in America, this one has been standing for 110 years. It's been a while for it. Maybe it'll collapse soon, who knows? But chapter 1, here we go. Chapter 1, The Journey to Jekyll Island. The secret meeting on Jekyll Island in Georgia at which the Federal Reserve was conceived, the birth of a banking cartel to protect its members from competition, the strategy of how to convince Congress and the public that this cartel was an agency of the United States government. Competition is good for the public, but it's bad for business. It's bad for business if you want to have a monopoly. You want to try and get rid of your competition. And here in America, they stop super mergers from happening, or big mergers of big business, when two big companies combine to buy out their competition or to merge, because what's going to happen is they'll squash the little guys because all the money makes that possible. You know, the more money you have at your disposal, you can wait out the competition. And before you know it, they just won't exist anymore because you outspent them, outlasted them. They can't keep up with you. And so they wanted to get rid of competition. And they also wanted to convince Congress and the public that it's an agency of the United States government, not just some people getting together to run you over and take your money. I'm not going to be reading all of this. I'm going to spot read here and there. So all of the men who came together for the creation of Jekyll Island met in New Jersey, and they took a train down to Jekyll Island. And one of the main cars had the name of Senator Aldrich on the car. And it says the name of Nelson Aldrich, senator from Rhode Island, was well known even in New Jersey. By 1910, he was one of the most powerful men in Washington, D.C., and his private railway car often was seen at the New York and New Jersey rail terminals during frequent trips to Wall Street. Aldrich was far more than a senator. He was considered to be the political spokesman for big business. As an investment associate of J.P. Morgan, he had extensive holdings in banking, manufacturing, and public utilities. His son-in-law was John D. Rockefeller Jr. 60 years later, his grandson, Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, would become Vice President of the United States. So here we can see how when you're getting together, you're going to try and keep things all in the family and build yourself a legacy. So Nelson Aldrich and the Rockefellers definitely have done their thing. And again, you can read about the Rockefellers Foundation in the Leipzig Connection. And Morgan, J.P. Morgan, can be read about in the Leipzig Connection for being a foundation, putting together money to change education. And you can also hear about them in foundations, their power and influence. No sooner had the senator boarded his car when several more passengers arrived with similar collections of luggage. The last man appeared just moments before the final all aboard. He was carrying a shotgun case. While Aldrich was easily recognized by most of the travelers who saw him stride through the station, the other faces were not familiar. These strangers had been instructed to arrive separately to avoid reporters, and should they meet inside the station, to pretend that they did not know each other. After boarding the train, they had been told to use first names only so as not to reveal each other's identity. As a result of these precautions, not even the private car porters and servants knew the names of these guests. Secrecy is the name of the game. They didn't want anybody to know whatsoever. As the passengers drifted off to sleep that night, to the rhythmic clinking of steel wheels against rail, little did they dream that, riding in the car at the end of their train, were 7 men who represented an estimated 1/4 of the total wealth of the entire world. This was the roster of the Aldrich car that night. Nelson W. Aldrich, Republican, whip in the Senate, chairman of the National Monetary Commission, business associate of J.P. Morgan, father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr., Abraham Pyatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the United States Treasury. Number 3, Frank A. Vanderlip, President of the National City Bank of New York, the most powerful of the banks at the time, representing William Rockefeller and the International Investment Banking House of Kuhn Loeb and Company. Henry P. Davison, Senior Partner of the J.P. Morgan Company. Charles D. Norton, President of J.P. Morgan's First National Bank of New York. Benjamin Strong, head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And number 7 was Paul M. Warburg, a partner in Kuhn Loeb and Company, a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France, and brother to Max Warburg, who was head of the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. Adding on for some proof about who was on the train that night, it says, in private correspondence between the author and Andrew L. Gary, the grandnephew of Abraham P. Andrew, Mr. Gary claims that Strong was not in attendance. On the other hand, Frank Vanderlip, who was there, says in his memoirs that he was. How could Vanderlip be wrong? Gary's response? He was in his 70s when he wrote the book and the essay in question. Perhaps the wish was father to the thought. If Vanderlip truly was an error, it was perhaps not so significant at all because, as Gary admits, Strong would have been among those few to be let in on the secret. In the absence of further confirmation to the contrary, we are compelled to accept Vanderlip's account. Revisiting the idea that on the train was 1/4 of the total wealth in the entire world was represented with 7 people. I don't know what the population was of America back then in 1910, but either way, to have 7 people represent 1/4 of the world's money is extraordinary. And so the concept being is that, hey, if they can get people behind what they're talking about, that perhaps you can be wealthy too. I mean, how else did they get their wealth? Maybe you could be the next 7 people to represent 1/4 of the world's wealth. You know, you put together 14 people instead of the 7. You know what I mean? They're trying to convince you that you can get money too, because they got money. But little do people know, or were aware of at the time. I shouldn't say little did people know, because I know people did know. People did fight against this cartel coming together. But for the general public, who doesn't have a clue, the idea is that, well, how could we go wrong? We're going to get into the concentration of wealth and a quote from a man named Pujo in the following paragraph. So, concentration of wealth. Centralization of control over financial resources was far advanced by 1910. In the United States, there were 2 main focal points of this control. The Morgan Group, who Dodd said he worked for, and the Rockefeller Group. Within each orbit was a maze of commercial banks, acceptance banks, and investment firms. In Europe, the same process had proceeded even further and had coalesced into the Rothschild Group and the Warburg Group. An article appeared in the New York Times on May 3rd, 1931, commenting on the death of George Baker, one of the Morgan's closest associates. It said 1/6 of the total wealth of the world was represented by the members of the Jekyll Island Club. The reference was only to those in the Morgan Group, members of the Jekyll Island Club. It did not include the Rockefeller Group or the European financiers. When all of these are combined, the previous estimate that 1/4 of the world's wealth was represented by these groups is probably conservative. In 1913, the year that the Federal Reserve Act becomes law, a subcommittee of the House Committee on Currency and Banking, under the chairmanship of Arsène Pujol of Louisiana, completed its investigation into the concentration of financial power in the United States. Pujol was considered to be a spokesman for the oil interests, part of the very group under investigation, and did everything possible to sabotage the hearings. In spite of his efforts, however, the final report of the committee at large was devastating. And so here is the comment from the committee. Your committee is satisfied from the proofs submitted that there is an established and well-defined identity and community of interest between a few leaders of finance, which has resulted in great and rapidly growing concentration of the control of many and credit in the hands of these few men, because those few men represent 1/4 of the world's wealth. So they're now going to control the credit of the people with very few men. Under our system of issuing and distributing corporate securities, the investigating public does not buy directly from the corporation. The securities travel from the issuing house through middlemen to the investor. It is only the great banks or bankers with access to the mainsprings of the concentrated resources made up of other people's money, and the banks, trust companies, and life insurance companies, and with the control of the machinery for creating markets and distributing securities, who have had the power to underwrite or guarantee the sale of large-scale security issues. Meaning, when you have a whole bunch of people investing in the stock market or life insurance or trust companies or banks, you have what's pretty much a pyramid scheme. A few people invest, a few people might get injured, but you can use all the money from the many to fix the few who got injured. That's why insurance companies now, as people well know, when you pay your car insurance, you're like, man, what happens to my $180 a month I pay? Well, they put that together with other people's money and they fix cars or give people new cars, or they'll total out a car, fix it, and then sell it, thanks to all the money that they have. And it's the same thing for life insurance. When someone dies, they put together everyone's money, gives it to the beneficiaries, and the scam continues. But anyway, the men who threw their control over the funds of our railroad and industrial companies are able to direct where such funds shall be kept, and thus to create these great reservoirs of the people's money are the ones who are in a position to tap those reservoirs for the ventures in which they are interested, and to prevent their being tapped for purposes which they do not approve. Again, since you have a lot of people involved in these pyramid schemes, when it's time to pay out, you don't really pay out very much because you're using the money of countless of thousands of people to give those people what they were due. But it really doesn't make any sense to do things like that. Like, people should save their own money and pay for whatever damage they cause to someone else's property on their own. Oh, but wait, that means people would actually have to save money. And then who knows how much money that would cost. So insurance is the perfect scam to give people more than what they actually have. But anyway, when we consider also, in this connection, that into these reservoirs of money and credit, there flow a large part of the reserves of the banks of the country, that they are also the agents and correspondents of the out-of-town banks and the loaning of their surplus funds in the only public money market of the country, and that a small group of men and their partners and associates have now further strengthened their hold upon the resources of these institutions by acquiring large stock holdings therein, by representation on their boards, and through valuable patronage. We begin to realize something of the extent to which these practical and effective domination and control over our greatest financial, railroad, and industrial corporations has developed, largely within the past 5 years, and that it is fraught with peril to the welfare of the country. Because people are pretty much giving their money away to others to ensure that people are okay, that the group has been protected against spending many dollars when things happen, aka you get an accident, your house burns down, or whatever it may be, into these companies where they make out with everyone else's money. Because what if something doesn't happen? Then you're spending all that money to protect yourself against possibilities, which just in the end doesn't make any sense. Because when you pay the money to the insurance company, they're going to take your money and insure everyone else throughout the year, and you pay $1,300, and maybe they'll take your $1,300 and insure, your neighbor who got into an accident, and they need $13 worth of insurance coverage, and they've been paying their $1,300 all year, but yet and still they pay a little deductible of $500, and away they go. Away the insurance company goes with all those extra dollars that you paid them, including if the damage is only like $200. $200 worth of damage, but you've been paying $1,300 all year. Pay a little $500 deductible, which is more than the damage cost, and all matters have been settled. But let's just say the damage was only $500 and you have $500 on hand. You paid for their car to get fixed or whatever happened and move along. But like I'm saying, that requires saving, which most Americans don't do nowadays. My first go around in college, I had a teacher who said to me that, she didn't say it to me, she said it to the entire class. And she said, when people get old, they tend to reveal secrets, both good and bad, just so people can know, clear their conscience some, and hopefully, the Lord will forgive them for the things that they've done, especially the bad things, if they make people aware of those things, so the rest of the world can make adjustments. All right? And so these people who were at the meeting on Jekyll Island want to confirm their stories, or else I wouldn't even have bothered telling you guys about this if the story couldn't be confirmed. So let's take a look and see exactly who admitted over time that they were at the meeting on Jekyll Island and what the purpose for the meeting was. Before I read on about how the story is confirmed,
one more part about how people reveal things as they get older. The video I posted about the rabbi who saw Messiah is the same concept. The rabbi was an Orthodox Jew, and Orthodox Jews don't believe in Christ. In fact, they believe Christ is in hell boiling in hot excrement. It's not that they didn't believe that the man who lived said he was Jesus and he was sent here by God and was part of God as well. He also, or they also, just didn't believe his story. And so through that concept, they believe he is in hell because that's blasphemy. So they believe Christ is in hell boiling in hot excrement. That's their words, not mine. Babylonian Talmud. Go look it up for yourself. Babylonian Talmud is the book most Orthodox Jews read. Some may act like they know about it, some don't, but it really does exist. So go look for that. But as he lived on, that rabbi said he saw Jesus shortly before his death. People who knew him said that he had revealed that to him. He didn't tell it to everybody. Go watch that video for more details. The rabbi who saw Messiah, Orthodox Jew, saw Jesus and told everybody about it. Anyway, the story is confirmed. For many years after the event, educators, commentators, and historians denied that the Jekyll Island meeting ever took place. Even now, the accepted view is that the meeting was relatively unimportant, and only paranoid unsophisticates would try to make anything out of it. Ron Chernow writes, "The Jekyll Island meeting would be the fountain of 1,000 conspiracy theories. Little by little, however, the story has been pieced together in amazing detail, and it has come directly or indirectly from those who actually were there. Furthermore, if what they say about their own proposes and actions does not constitute a classic conspiracy, then there is little meaning to the word." The first leak regarding this meeting found its way into print in 1916. It appeared in Leslie's Weekly and was written by a young financial reporter by the name of B.C. Forbes, who later founded Forbes magazine. The article was primarily in praise of Paul Warburg, and it is likely that Warburg let the story out during conversations with the writer. At any rate, the opening paragraph contained a dramatic but highly accurate summary of both the nature and purpose of the meeting. Picture a party of the nation's greatest bankers stealing out of New York on a private railroad car under cover of darkness, stealthily hieing hundreds of miles south, embarking on a mysterious launch, sneaking on to an island deserted by all but a few servants, living there a full week under such rigid secrecy that the names of not one of them was once mentioned, lest the servants learned the identity and disclosed to the world this strangest, most secret expedition in the history of American finance. I am not romancing. I am giving to the world for the first time the real story of how famous Aldrich currency. I am not romancing. I am giving the world for the first time the real story of how the famous Aldrich currency report, the foundation of our new currency system, was written. I wasn't intending on my epilogue being so long. However, at times it's just necessary. So I have to get over myself. And bring up here you have B.C. Forbes writing for Leslie's Weekly about a conversation he had with Paul Warburg discussing the details of the meeting and how no one would use their first names and go off on their secret expedition about American finance. He said he wasn't romancing at all. All right? Reading on. In 1930, Paul Warburg wrote a massive book, 1,750 pages in all, entitled The Federal Reserve System, Its Origin and Growth. In this tome, he described the meeting and its purpose, but did not mention either location or the names of those who attended. But he did say the results of the conference were entirely confidential. Even the fact that there had been a meeting was not permitted to become public. Then in the footnote he added, though 18 years have since gone by, I do not feel free to give a description of
this most interesting conference concerning which Senator Aldrich pledged all participants to secrecy. An interesting insight to Paul Warburg's attendance at the Jekyll Island meeting came 34 years later in a book written by his son, James. James had been appointed by FDR as director of the budget and during World War II as head of the Office of War Information. In this book, he described how his father, who did not know one end of a gun from the other, borrowed a shotgun from a friend and carried it with him to the train to disguise himself as a duck hunter. This part of the story was corroborated in the official biography of Senator Aldrich, written by Nathaniel Wright Stevenson. So, Warburg didn't know anything about a gun, but he borrowed a gun from a friend, just to make it look like he was going on a duck hunting mission. Again, secrecy is the name of the game here. Secrecy. I have a saying where the devil has to keep the game fair. I don't mean the devil. I mean God. God has to keep the game fair. If the game isn't kept fair, then how will anyone know? So people divulge secrets. That's just my own little theory about why these things come to the light. That's so everybody can know. So the game will be kept fair. You know, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you didn't know anything about money and finances and the Federal Reserve and how these men came together to make the creature from Jekyll Island, to make the Federal Reserve System that we have now that's been in existence since 1913. So there will be no excuse of not knowing how these things came together, or at least that's how I look at it. So, in the autumn of 1910, 6 men, in addition to Aldrich, went out to shoot ducks. That is to say, that is what they told the world their purpose was. Mr. Warburg, who was of the number, gives an amazing account of his feelings when he boarded a private car in Jersey City, bringing with him all the accoutrements of a duck shooter. The joke was in the fact that he had never shot a duck in his life and had no intention of shooting any. The duck shoot was a blind. Stevenson continues with a description of the encounter at Brunswick Station. He tells us that shortly after they arrived, the station master walked into the private car and shocked them by his apparent knowledge of the identities of everyone on board. To make matters even worse, he said that a group of reporters were waiting outside. Davidson took charge. "Come outside, old man," he said, "and I will tell you a story." No one claims to know what story was told standing on the railroad ties that morning, but a few moments later, Davidson returned with a broad smile on his face. "It's all right," he said reassuringly. "They won't give us away." Stevenson continues, "The rest is silence. The reporters dispersed, and the secret of the strange journey was not divulged. No one asked him how he managed it, and he did not volunteer the information." In the February 9th, 1935 issue of the Saturday Evening Post, an article appeared written by Frank Vanderlip. In it he said, "Despite my views about the value to society of greater publicity for the affairs of corporations, there was an occasion near the close of 1910 when I was as secretive indeed, as furtive as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. We were told to leave our first names behind us. We were told further that we should avoid dining together on the night of our departure. We were instructed to come one at a time and as unobtrusively as possible to the railroad terminal on the New Jersey littoral of the Hudson, where Senator Aldrich's private car would be in readiness, attached to the rear end of a train for the South. Once aboard the private car, we began to observe the taboo that had been fixed on last names. We addressed one another as Ben, Paul, Nelson, Abe. It is Abraham, Pyatt, Andrew. Davidson and I adopted even deeper disguises, abandoning our first names on the theory that we were always right. He became Wilbur and I became Orville, after those two aviation pioneers, the Wright brothers. The servants and train crew may have known the identities of one or two of us, but they did not know all, and it was the names of all printed together that would have made our mysterious journey significant in Washington, in Wall Street, even in London. Discovery, we knew, simply must not happen, or else all our time and effort would be wasted. if it were to be exposed publicly that our particular group had gotten together and written a banking bill, that bill would have no chance whatever of passage by Congress. So he admitted that they wrote a bill and that they were going to start the Federal Reserve. They got rid of their names, adopted fake names, and they went on to Jekyll Island, did whatever they had to do there, and came out with the new Federal Reserve System. You know, again, the word conspiracy comes from conspire, and conspire simply means breathe together. That these men breathed a plan together and put it into action. And now they have to worry about getting it passed by Congress. And that will be a problem. In the next part, we will get to how they wanted to present the bill to Congress so it could be passed.